Just don't be rubbish. Fancy cameras left to watch online.
Is it actually?
Nick Zavulis, your chest is being broadcast to the world because we are live on YouTube. I'm expecting slightly more.
More like 45.
45.
40.
Yeah, just putting the sense. Holly, can you go to 24? If not, I'll I'll tell you what, we'll switch this down. Yeah.
Yep, there's one there. There's one here. Okay, got it. Yes?
No.
Well, you have to connect. To be fair, it's not connected, Ed. Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's not. No, you're just trying to hold.
Okay, done.
I'd like to wake up.
I tried to be good.
It's a completely different style.
Oh, that's
But that's not what people think.
Don't stop up. I'm straight to all know it. Oh, that's fine.
What else?
Yeah. And what else? What the other person? First serving.
And we've already got about 7, but it would be nice if we congregated towards the centre of rows a bit further down, if that makes sense.
are you debating? So excited.
It's gonna stop. It's gonna say right off the bat.
Alright. Okay, you want us to suit up with What about cake?
Other people outside.
Guys? Okay, welcome everybody to our show debate on animal research. We'll talk more about that in a second, but first some announcements pertaining to members of Warwick Debating Society, which is hopefully all of you, or will be. So sessions continue as normal after this. On Wednesdays we're going to be in Lib 1. On Fridays we're going to be in Wednesdays L4 even. Fridays Lib 1. The room keeps changing. Those who were here last week will remember how our property, aka HO52, was stolen from us, which was a shame. So those sessions will continue where we'll be doing our training and debates and everything else. Today's a special session with a special type of training where you're going to sort of get to see some pros in action, as it were. Some other announcements. So first, you've got a social tonight. It's going to be really, really good. It's our Nick is very excited. It's going to be our big trip to Leamington. So we've got a scavenger hunt theme. That means that you're going to be going to leave from the duck at about 6:30, and every single group of about sort of 4 to 6 people is going to get one of these. This is sort of your drinks card, and then in your sort of small groups, one of whom will be someone who knows Leamington quite well. We're going to go around Leamington, where there's a drink that you have to have between you at every single establishment, as it were. So that might be a pint of Coke at the undergraduate, or it might be a glass of wine at Saints, or some Eliminator at Kelsey's, or or whatever it is, right? So essentially, it's an idea so you get to know quite well the people in your group. You get to sort of be led around Leamington, and then once you've sort of completed your checklist, as it were, once you've scavenged all your drinks, you're all going to meet up and sort of spend the rest of the night together. It's going to be great. I remember, like, it was my introduction to Leamington the first year. I really enjoyed it. Found it very helpful as well. It should be a lot of fun. So that's leaving the duck at 6:30. Other announcements. Sign-ups are available for NAMDA Novice competition. NAMDA Novice is a debating competition happening the weekend of week 4, being held in Hull. And what it is, it's a tournament designed for people who haven't done that much debating before. So you're eligible to speak in it if you have never broken at a schools competition. And if you're not sure what breaking at a schools competition means, that almost definitely means you're eligible to speak in it. Like almost definitely. You can apply. There's like a link on like the group or the doobly-doo or something, and I'll post a link and the doobly-doo in the group again at some point, so you can all see it. You can apply. We've got space for loads of people, and we're trying to see if we can take everyone who applies. So please do. It's going to be a lot of fun. Sign up for that. Also, if you have like more debating experience than that, like feel free to come judge if you want. We always need judges to judge things, and judging is also quite good fun. So you can apply for that as well. It's in the same link. Any other announcements? We've just released a motion for our public debate in week 5. That's going to be this house would ban page 3, and there's Louise can come down and talk about it if she wants.
Oh yeah, okay. So hi, I'm Lou. I'm the public debate chair. We've just released our motion for week 5. It's going to be on the 29th of October, which is a Tuesday, and it's on the motion this house would ban page 3. So what we've just done is put up the like posters for it online, and in the next couple of days we're going to be launching a proper Facebook event that you can join and get all the details for it. If you go onto our website, which is warwickdebatingunion.org, and go on coming up, you can also get all the details about it there. If you came to the Arab Spring debate, which I hope some of you did, which we did, it's basically the same format as that, but obviously completely different with different people. So we're going to be releasing speakers pretty soon. So yeah, look it up on Facebook and you'll get all the information.
Cool, that's all the debating society related stuff out of the way. Now on to what we're doing today. So today we're going to debate the motion this House would end all forms, ban all forms of animal research. Something that's been a hot topic in the news recently. Like some people believe that animal research and our sort of cruelty to animals is like our generation's great moral blight that we'll look back on and be appalled of. Other people say that it's a necessary way to keep more humans alive. Should be a very good debate. The format we're doing today is something called extended mace, but essentially what it's going to be is like the normal debates we've been doing, but instead of extending, we're going to do what a historical version of an extension was. So there'll be no extension speakers. Instead, there's going to be a floor debate where people, or everyone in the audience, gets the opportunity to have their say on what's already been said and criticize it, or like accept it, and also get to advance the area of a debate. So in the same way that when we do British parliamentary debating, we have a top half debate where it's pretty obvious what their roles are to sort of speak and forward the case, and then we have an extension speaker. Instead of an extension speaker, what we're going to have is the audience extending on the debate. So as you're listening to the debate, I'd like you to think about sort of ways you would respond to the arguments which are being given, or if there's something you think which really is important and hasn't been mentioned, again, feel free to make a speech about like that during the extension. So we get, so that's the general format. More specifically, we're going to have the Prime Minister speaking, who's going to open the case. Then the Leader of the Opposition, who's going to open the case for the Opposition. Then the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will sort of support their sides respectively, rebutting what's happened before and rebuilding their own arguments. We're then going to have this floor debate where we want everyone to really get involved and extend it and rebut what's been said. And then we're going to have the summations, and the summations are going to attempt to mesh the floor debate into the debate we've already had to show why we should vote for one side or another. And so, first thing though, I've been asked by the big organisers office, because this is an event which is happening nationwide, to take account of how people stand before the debate. So you can either vote for, against, or abstain. So who is for banning all animal research and testing on animals? Okay, who is against banning all? Yeah, more people, but I've been asked to count it. It's fine. And who is abstaining? Who doesn't have an opinion yet? Okay. Obviously don't know their job because they're abstaining. Can we keep the hands up? Nice and high. Cool. So pretty resoundingly, the House currently stands against animal research, against banning all forms of animal research. See how the debate goes. And now I would like to call upon the Prime Minister, Elliot Pallett, to open the case that stands in his name.
Are you ready for the time?
Yep, that's when you can see.
The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? The continued apathy to all animals' continued torture for our own purposes is going to be looked back upon as the greatest moral oversight of our generation. I'm going to talk to you about two things today. Firstly, the precept upon which we give people rights in the first place, and why there is no morally significant criteria that applies to animals. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about just how replaceable are animals, and is it absolutely necessary for us to test upon them. In terms of mech, we are going to ban all experiments that we would not do on a non-consenting human. That is to say, anything we would not do on an unconscious adult, on someone who has such severe mental disabilities that they cannot practically consent, and anything we would not do to children, we do not support being done on animals because they are not capable of consent in the exact same way that those individuals are. Firstly, why do we grant? Three main things here. Firstly, the criteria of suffering and why that is vitally important. 4 million animals every year are being experimented on in 2012, right? We are literally surgically giving them brain damage, we are breaking their bones, and perhaps importantly, we are deliberately psychologically torturing them to find out the effects of what happens to them when they do that. We do this mostly on mice, roughly 2.7 million. Or may stand up and say, oh, but not all experiments are like that and we're happy to ban those, right? But even at its very best, we genetically modify those animals and psychologically torture them through editing their breeding patterns and affecting the way that they interact with one another on a personal and individual level and the way that they live, the way that they choose to live their lives, and then cull the ones we don't want. But even some of those GM ones, we deliberately make them be born inside out, right? So that they will die young deaths. We give them heart disease at a very young age. There is no way in which they can say that this is not experiments which require suffering, okay? But we express that in expressly human terms in the same reason that we sympathize with human suffering, right? We express that in terms of the way that they are incapable of functioning in reasonable relationships with one another. Clearly, it does have a mental effect comparable to humans in terms of causing psychological damage to them. Otherwise, the experiment would be useless in the first place, right? We are torturing these beings psychologically for the purposes of ourselves, right? We don't necessarily give them these rights off the basis of the fact that, like, you know, they're different to us, okay? We even give rights to people who cannot, like, reasonably expect to give them back to us. See the fact that we give rights to those who are, like, severely mentally disabled. See the fact that we give rights to, like, try and minimize the suffering of those who would do us harm, right? Not the case for these animals. They deserve rights in exactly the same way for the exact same reasons that we can sympathize with their suffering. But secondly, they might stand up and talk about rationality, why that's important, okay? Either two or three things here, can't remember. Three things, okay? Firstly, rationality is not morally significant. We still give to the severely mentally disabled and children rights off the basis of the same thing, despite the fact that we do not regard them as rational beings in the exact same way, okay, right? But more importantly than that, right, the actions don't specifically accept the suffering of that being just because of how intelligent or not intelligent they are. That's incredibly important when you realize what I've been saying about suffering already. B, they might talk about sort of opt-in contracts and, like, they can never be reasonably expected to opt in. Again, right, like, aversion to pain is a clear opt-out in the first instance. They do run away from us when we try to torture them. Funny that. But in any case, right? Yes.
Okay, so most of the time we give individuals right not to have their freedom taken away from them. Why is that not a fungible good against other things we might do? For instance, the freedom for many other people to be safe from robbers.
Okay, right, like, so, you know, insofar as we grant people freedom, we grant them the freedom off the basis that we're like it's a positive freedom, as it were. So, you know, we grant them that freedom so that they can reasonably expect that they can't be impinged on by other people. We clearly actively are impinging upon the individual rights of each animal not to extensively suffer. In any case, like, let's carry on, right? So, someone not understanding the fact that you're, like, or the reasoning behind your torturing of them is not reason to do it, or even if you can reasonably expect gain. C, person behavior, right? Even mice plan and remember. If they didn't react in the same way as we do in terms of these things, then there would be no point in doing this experiment. Thirdly, they might go down the lines of speciesism, okay, right? But note that we decry racism and sexism because they're not morally significant factors in the first place, right? Physical differences do exist between these groups of people, but they're not morally significant physical differences because they're not related to the extent to which they can have pleasurable or unpleasurable lives. We think that this is not the case for animals. They can have pleasurable lives and they can have deeply unpleasurable ones as a result of our actions, right? Abstract notions of sameness do not give a significant line of difference between what we have done in terms of slavery and what we are now doing in terms of animals, okay? Because equally they appeal to these notions of difference. But finally, like, are animals really that replaceable, okay? 4 things here. Firstly, failed drugs and unknown losses. They're going to stand up and tell you that we have no idea how many drugs we might get in the future as a result of animal testing. Similarly, we have no idea how many we might lose, right? Note that penicillin, for instance, is lethal on guinea pigs, an animal that we extensively use as the rodent phase of our testing. This means that had penicillin had chosen randomly their first animal to be guinea pigs, we would have thrown that drug out, our key antibiotic. Note also that aspirin would fail current animal testing standards because it has fundamentally different effects on mice. That is to say that we deliberately throw out lots and lots of drugs as a result of this data that they give, in a very similar way that we might not potentially accidentally stumble across another drug in the future. So we lose those potential benefits in the first instance. No, thank you. Secondly, we force pharmaceutical companies to adapt the way that they conduct research, right? Note that the priority under the status quo is to roll out the latest drug. Note also that when they are put forward for experiments, animals are deemed irreplaceable by current medical standards. You'll note that in the 1980s, Botox experimentation was regarded impossible to do without animals. When we banned it, we forced them to adapt their mechanisms, and lo and behold, they still found a way to create Botox and test Botox without testing on animals. This means that we plausibly gave them massive incentives to develop new non-harmful ways in a way that doesn't exist already. Thirdly, we already have extensive mechanisms to use, right? Humans and micro-testing, okay, right? We already use human trials anyway, and these human trials still go wrong even with that because of the physiological differences. Note that animals map very badly onto the toxicity of things because individual animals react in very different ways. Indeed, different subspecies of mice, of which we experiment on over 200, react all in different ways and often give different research, okay? But note that things like carcinogens are also incredibly important because they couldn't be replicated in a lab with animals, despite conclusive human evidence that things like smoking and asbestos caused extensive damage. We delayed publication of these results. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about the potential of animals as for a false positive. You'll note that Vioxx killed thousands because it tested positive on mice for being able to safely reduce chances of heart disease. We think that when you roll out on the basis of difference, you also roll out the bad drugs, and we think that the rights of animals are paramount.
I'd like to thank Elliot very much for his speech, and I would like to call upon George to open the case for the opposition.
Here.
Sorry, I've got a lot of paper.
George, that pen being not the pen.
Do you need a pen, Toby?
No, we're fine.
Pro tip, bring pens to debates.
Wait, you're okay.
Pro. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not defend unnecessary animal testing or unnecessary animal research, right? We don't believe that we have to do that in order to win this debate. The motion specifically says that this House would ban all forms of animal research. To win this debate, we just have to prove to you that some forms of animal research are necessary. That's what we're going to do today. Even the RSPCA, the most respected animal charity in the world, doesn't think we should ban all forms of animal testing, right? So I presume Elliot will be revoking his membership. We don't support cosmetic testing. We don't support testing on animals that can pass the mirror test. This is status quo. We already have to have really stringent conditions in the UK on the conditions under which you're allowed to test on animals. We support those fully, right? The point is that we think there are some cases in which it is necessary to test animals. We don't condone that. We think it's a regrettable necessity, right? If there is a suitable alternative, scientists are already legally obliged to use that one. So 2 things I want to talk to you about today. No. First thing, moral duty is to reduce suffering, and that's suffering to all beings, not to just humans or animals. Second thing is to invoke the doctrine of double effect. I'll tell you in a minute. So bear in mind before that, ladies and gentlemen, that animal research has had massive positive impacts on health for both humans and for animals, right? The only reason we know about the reason that animals can feel pain is because we used MRI scans, which were developed by animal testing, right? So like the development of insulin, before which type 1 diabetes was basically a death sentence, the development of tamoxifen, which it caused a 30% fall in breast cancer deaths, was eradicated smallpox. Conversely, when we don't test on animals and we don't test drugs properly, there's a potential that drugs are insufficiently tested, which leads to things like the thalidomide tragedy. We don't think that is an acceptable gradient. Yeah.
You'll note that when Botox was banned from being tested on people, we developed new ways of testing it because the pressures didn't exist before, when previously it was called impossible by all those involved. Why is this not the same with pharmaceuticals?
That's objectively not true, Elliot, right? The reason we didn't test Botox on like humans was because we developed artificial human skin, right? Not like that we thought it was like bad or something. A few other extraneous bits are rebuttable. We think that rights are tradable and absolute. This is why my right to swing my arms around stops at the point at which those arms come into contact with James's face, right? We think that like we think that like on the weight of animals point, we think no, like we obviously test these things on more than one animal. I think that's fairly obvious, and that is status quo, right? Different ways. Oh yeah, the thing about like different subspecies of mice, we think is just like another thing which is a fallacy, right? 95% of our DNA we share with mice. That doesn't matter if you are X or Y species of mice. That is the same mice, right? So first point, moral duties. We think that humans are not inherently more valuable than animals. We think we do have moral duties to animals as well as to other humans, right? One of these duties is to reduce unnecessary suffering. Sometimes, right, so we think that, however, there is always suffering in the world, because if we stop all animal research, if we do what Elliot wants us to do, people will still be dying horribly from degenerative, degrading diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, horrible forms of cancer, things like that. We think that that suffering is still going to exist, right? When we can't create a world of no suffering, we think our moral duty therefore lies in like the in an attempt to create a world with as little suffering as possible in it. So if we buy that all suffering is universal and that my suffering as a human being is as valuable as an animal suffering, right? No. We say we have a moral obligation to take human suffering into this equation of suffering things. So when by inflicting a comparatively small degree of animal suffering, we can prevent a vastly greater amount of human suffering, bear in mind that those sufferings are therefore equal. We think that it doesn't matter whether they're animal or human suffering, right? We think that therefore when you can inflict that comparatively small degree of suffering and like prevent a much greater degree of suffering, we think that is the fine thing to do. That's where our moral duty lies. No. Why most suffering does accrue to humans? Because we have a comparatively greater capacity to suffer than, say, a lab rat. Why is this? Because when you have a conception of yourself, when you can conceive of what it means for your impending doom to be racing down the tracks towards you, right? We think that means that you have a much greater capacity to suffer psychological trauma and things than you do when you do not have that ability as a lab rat. We objectively know that there is not enough matter in the brain of a lab rat. We know that through MRI scans. Remember how we have MRI scans again at animal testing, right? We objectively know that there is not enough matter in the brains of lab rats to be able to have a conception of the self, right? So we think that given that we've established animal suffering is equivalent to human suffering, and we've also just established to you why humans have greater capacity to suffer because we can conceive of ourselves, right? When I have a notion of what it means to be George Bainbridge, right? That means that, I'm not like some special guy, whatever, right? So that means that it is much more traumatic to me when I know that this entity that I perceive myself to be is about to be wiped out than it is for a lab rat to perceive that it's about to be wiped out, because it doesn't know what it is, right? It doesn't have a conception of the self. We objectively know that that's a fact. No. Next we're going to questions in the floor debate. So next we're going to invoke what we call the doctrine of double effect. So we think that we have to choose something to test on. There is no perfect way of pharmaceutical testing. We think this is the best one, right? We think that something, according to the doctrine of double effect, is morally permissible if it is foreseeable, unavoidable, and regrettable, right? For example, if a terrorist has a number of hostages, is making a credible threat, and will blow up a building which they are all in, if a government sniper, let's call him Elliot, has a clear headshot on that man, we think he should fire to kill the terrorist when there is no other way, right? We think, were it possible to not kill that man and save the hostages, then we would, but in the case that it isn't, we think it's fine to kill the terrorist. We're aware of the consequences of choosing either option, right? And we have the capability for either, right? Therefore, you are morally responsible for whichever consequence occurs, right? Because you know which was going to happen, you're capable of choosing either one. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that we think that Elliot, Toby, and Aparna, and indeed like anybody who wants to support the proposition in this debate, we don't think they can wash their hands of the consequences of not testing on animals. We don't think they can wash their hands of the deaths when people do not get the drugs they need, when people do not get the antiretroviral drugs and die of AIDS. We don't think they can wash their hands of those deaths. We think that those deaths are on their conscience if they propose this motion. Thank you.
Would like to thank George very much for his speech and call upon Toby to continue the case for the government.
Oh, they don't actually time it.
Yep. And there's a clinical C there.
Okay, you're ready.
I'll zoom in on it.
That's fine. I can see it.
We can see it better now.
Ladies and gentlemen, they do not look like us, they do not think like us, they do not communicate like us. Therefore, we kill them, we torture them, we do beastly things to them because we consider ourselves to be more important. We consider the rights, we give ourselves rights. We do not give these animals the same rights, and we think that is fundamentally wrong. On this side of the house, we are perfectly happy to wash our hands of the potential medicinal benefits. What we're not happy to wash out, what we're not happy to deal with, is the continual torture of these animals. Okay, so let's start with a bit of rebuttal. One of the most interesting things George said was the fact that the reason that we're more important than animals is because we are able to imagine ourselves in a horrible position, and therefore our rights are more important. He also made a big utilitarian argument about why it's so important to save life. Okay, both those arguments exactly justify medicinally testing someone who is mentally deficient, someone who is unable to do the things like self-conceptualize, and is unable and I would also be able to test on them to actually do better testing, just be an actual person, right? But yet I do not think that on that side they are going to be supporting that. So we don't think their conception of rights is actually very effective. And so that's what I want to do today, is construct a reasonable version of human rights and then apply that to animals. Okay. So what are the most fundamental things that we think that everyone deserves and should not be violated as possible? First of all is personal autonomy, and second of all is happiness, right? Autonomy is really important because that essentially has freedom, your ability to do things, your ability to live the life the way you want, right? The ability to when you see something and your ability to go and achieve that, right? As George pointed out, sometimes your ability to do things is minimized. We have laws, right? But we think that when we're testing animals, what we're removing is the actual ability to have control of their own body, right? Their body and what happens to it, and their pain and suffering belongs to someone else, right? They do not own it. That is the most important thing, that no one owns the rights to your body, right? Similarly, on pain and suffering, right? We think that people should not be unnecessary. Where it's unnecessary, people shouldn't be harmed and treated very badly, right? For example, we don't say if we have a situation where we can kill someone and harvest their organs to save 5 other people, we don't think that's right. We're losing all the autonomy for that person, and we're causing a huge amount of suffering. So why do we think that we can apply these rights to animals? Okay, what is it that animals have, right? The means they justify these rights. First of all, we think memory is actually one of the most important things, right? When an animal runs towards the edge of their cage because they want food, it's because they remember that person coming in before to get food, right? When they see a bird in the sky, they run away, right? They run away because they remember seeing birds in the sky before, harming their friends, right? We think that when it comes to the importance of I might understand that bird might kill me, but the reason that's a bad thing is because it makes me afraid, right? It's the emotions, which the understanding of what that bird might do to me is really what we care about. We don't really care about how someone thinks about it. It's the fact they're afraid of the bird, which is the real harm. And it doesn't matter why these animals like fear the bird, fear the human. It doesn't matter why they're in pain, right? The fact of the matter is they are in pain. They do fear those emotions, those things that make them panic, those things that make them run away and want to hide in a hole, eat their own skin, and do all kinds of and behave in all kinds of horrible ways, right? Are because of the emotions which are real. And just because they are unable to understand does not mean that those are real. Like we say like these. We say that's the reasons why we think they have rights. We think that it's pretty obvious why testing removes those rights, right? It's pretty obvious. Elliot's already explained why it is that actually these rights do, why these things can treat animals so badly, right? But like the thing is, and this is so important, right? Because we don't fundamentally see a difference between humans and animals. The only justification they've given for the difference between humans and animals is as we've already said, can still apply to other people. Actually, yeah, sorry, we'll take James.
Okay, so why is your definition of rights absolute, not tradable against other rights which we think people hold? We already think people have a right not to be imprisoned, except criminals, because we need to keep everybody else safe. The only way that can be consistent with your case is if you're willing to have trade-offs and not hold animal rights as absolute, as you seem to be doing.
Yeah, so the point is, we're saying that there are some rights, right, which should not be violated, right? In terms of like, we would not do this to a person, right? We would not go up to a person and say say we are going to now test on you because we think you can help other people, right? We think that right exists for a person, and we've been constructing why it is in fact humans and animals and we're trying to explain to you why animals and humans share those rights. We also think the ability to own your body, right, and like what happens to it is something you're given, it's something that everyone should start with, right? Because without that, we think that without that right, like a huge number of things struggle to exist. For example, like wars, murder, animal testing on people, right? Okay, so in terms of the future, right? Elliot's already told you why actually people are able to improve the way that they can do testing, but with Botox example. Why do we think this is always the case? I think this is because people are ingenious, right? There are a huge amount of scientists who are very intelligent, who come up with solutions around these things, right? For example, currently we're able to use stem cells to grow bits of people and then do our drugs, for example, like an organ or skin, and use the drugs on that person, on that particular organ, right? This is science which doesn't necessarily exist right now, but is certainly being developed, right? The reason it's not being developed faster right now is because the animal rights are seen as good enough, right? But the point is, as soon as we ban animal rights, these kinds of scientific developments actually do have to exist, right? We think that people will get round these issues, right? To say that, because George set up from the very beginning that it's necessary to have these, right? We don't think it's necessary. It's a balance, right? Nothing's ever necessary, and we think that given that we can change these things, and given that people are ingenious, that there will be a huge number of problems which humans have faced, right? And just because you guys in the audience can't imagine how it is we can do something different, doesn't mean you should just say, oh, because I can't imagine anything different, therefore things should not be different. So for all these reasons, we beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank Toby very much for his speech, and we'd like to call upon James to continue the case for the opposition.
Governments spend a lot of time today appealing to your emotions. They tell you how terrible animal testing is, the level of suffering that these animals undergo, how it's torture, how it violates their rights, how it cannot possibly be justified in almost any circumstance. We agree. We agree. There are almost no circumstances in which animal testing is justified, but there are some where it is. And when they say that this is a Rubicon that we will not cross, there are some things we can't think of, they fail to recognise that the world itself is a morally abhorrent place, and that some decisions have to be taken because the alternative is also terrible. It's not an argument to stand here and say that one outcome is really bad. Every outcome is really bad, and we on side opposition want to choose the least of those bad outcomes, okay? And it's unfortunate that proposition have failed to have that perspective because it led them to make some arguments which were interesting. First of all, they say some bad drugs just slip through, and isn't animal testing bad? Firstly, pharmacy is not 100% exact science. Some drugs will always slip through. It is unfortunate that happens, but true. But moreover, it happens on your side as well. We can also spend the entire debate, bring up example after example of one that got through animal testing that shouldn't, or would have been failed and averted huge amounts of harms had it gone through animal testing, okay? The problem is that when we tell you, no thanks, Elliot, that the alternatives aren't as good, more of that happens on your side than it does on ours. Secondly, Toby spends a lot of time talking about rights and how you have a right to be free, and we give animals rights for certain things. Why are those rights not tradable? I've asked multiple times and they haven't had us an answer yet. No thanks, Elliot. The answer is simple. All rights are given, but all are tradable against others. If we are in a situation in which we have one course of action which leads to one person dying, and one course of action which leads to 5 people dying, it's not giving all parties equal rights to say that, well, we don't know which we'd take. It's obviously giving that one person a far greater rights to continuing their own life by choosing them than it is the other 5 people. No thank you. Then they say, well, alternatives will be developed. 2 problems here. Firstly, there's a time lag with that. In the time it takes you to create that alternative treatment which can research into that drug and eventually find a cure, large numbers of humans are going to die. You have to admit you are sacrificing their lives. But also it's completely speculative. The reasoning they give is one that it seems good on the face of it, but it isn't actually. We'll get rid of existing tests and eventually something will definitely come along. What happens if it doesn't come along, Elliot? No thanks. What happens if the test never gets developed that can actually do what animal testing does? Will you at least admit then that we do have to test on animals, or you are happy to let those people die? No answer from proposition, and opponent needs to give us one, because I think that's morally indefensible. No thank you. 3 contentions. Secondly, where moral duties are in conflict, it is absolutely correct to prioritise humans over animals. Thirdly, animal testing is necessary in most cases. And fourthly, by not testing, you fail in the moral duties which we all have, okay? So firstly, why it's okay to deprioritise animals. Firstly, I'm a vegetarian, okay? And I think that animals do have rights and we do need to care for them most of the time. Why? Because in the case of eating meat, there is no conflict between morally equitable goods. The right of an animal to go on, continue living and enjoying its life is far greater than your ability to eat food which is 1, bad for you, and 2, not that tasty, okay? So that means that over the long term, okay, there's no conflict there, okay? We can have a world in which there's no unnecessary suffering at all, because I can give you hundreds of great vegetarian recipes, you can have great food, animals can continue to live, and everyone's happy, okay? The problem is, that's not the case here. We're not doing animal testing will lead to some harms occurring, okay? Now, these guys say, oh, well, they're just going to say it's speciesist to say that animals are necessarily less important. No. For instance, suppose I'm comparing myself against another being, say that's George Bainbridge. We're both in a situation of pain. I'm screaming out saying, ow, that's painful. And George is screaming out saying, ow, that's painful. It would be speciesist or Georgist for me to say that because I'm James, my pain is more important than George's, despite all the signs I have to say that he's also in pain, and that's also a problem. It's not speciesist. Suppose that we're, for instance, both been banned from attending the Royal Shakespeare Company at Stratford. You should all go, by the way, it's great. It would not be speciesist to say that, well, if George is playing on his Xbox and, going to the football and doesn't really care about Shakespeare, that his deprivation of Shakespeare is as morally harmful as mine, which is very great because I love Hamlet and want to go and see it all of the time. It's not speciesist to say that where there's a clear disparity between individuals or between beings as to their ability to enjoy a certain good, that depriving them of that good is an equal moral harm. No, thank you. So, animals die and they are no longer able to exist. That is a harm. They do not, however, have brains that are sufficiently complex to generate a consciousness in which they can contemplate their own lack of existence in the future and their own entering of oblivion in the way that humans can. No, thank thank you. I'm sorry, guys, that's a problem of neurology, not one of speciesism, okay? So it's not speciesist, and it's not just prejudiced to say that where those two beings are in conflict and where we can only preserve one of their lives, it should be the life of the human, because their ceasing to exist would be far worse for them than it would be for that animal. If it was merely inflicting pain, then that would be true, okay? So, yeah, go on then, Elliot.
So, if I could kill you with heart failure where you stand, and everyone else on this bench would die otherwise from heart failure, would it be legitimate for me to do that against your will?
If there was no other way of ensuring that everybody could go on living, that would be entirely legitimate, and I would happily lay down my life so that everyone in this room could continue to exist, because I'm a good whole person. Cool. Yeah. So, thirdly, is animal testing necessary? Because these guys say there are alternatives. Okay, there are alternatives. There are, but not equally good alternatives. Not alternatives that will achieve the moral outcome. Then that's what we really care about. Why is that the case? Firstly, because we have massive problems now that antibiotics diseases becoming resistant to antibiotics. We need to be able to have multi-generation of observation, which we can't do in human testing because we need to be able to see how genes are passed down from one to the other. We also need to check out things like behavioural diseases. So while we might be able to see in an in vitro cell culture that a particular drug achieves a particular chemical change in a cell, we're not able to see whether that actually correlates to, for instance, mice not being blind, which is probably important if we were trying to develop a drug that cures blindness, for example, okay? Also, huge numbers of things that are very important for drugs are all interrelated. The nervous system, blood and brain chemistry, gland and organ secretions, immunological responses, all of those interact with one another at the same time when you put a drug in. The problem is that when you have computer models or when you have in vitro cell cultures, they can't accurately map all of those very complex interactions. And when they say, well, we know we can have computer models, all of those are based on assumptions which we don't have full knowledge on. So they're always going to be less accurate, okay? And that's why it's really good that we can do things like study simian immunodeficiency virus as a good model for treating HIV compared to having a computer model which is less accurate. At the end of the day, animal testing is morally horrible. It's something that we should all aim to not be doing. But at the moment, the choices are animal testing or human testing or allowing people to die. It's not a good outcome. It's the least worst outcome. We're very happy to stand for that.
I would like to thank the speaker very much for his speech, and now we're going to come to the floor debate and look at all you lovely people on the webcam. You're all on YouTube. Cool. Right, so the way this is going to go is those of you who have done some debating will have done, know what an extension is.
Sorry, do we have to be on YouTube? Do we have to be done? Is that part of the...
Oh, I can turn it back if you
Why
want.
don't you didn't ask us? That's
No, okay, I can turn it back if you want. I was just asked by the person. If anybody doesn't want to be on YouTube, raise their hand now. Okay, cool. No worries. Sorry, I just sort of assumed words I should have done. Sorry about that. Well, cool. I'm afraid your voice will be on the recording, although I can stop recording now, so you're fine with that. Okay, no worries. So, stand over here so you don't see like half my body on the webcam. So those of you who have done British parliamentary debating before will know that now we would normally have the extensions. Historically, there were no extensions. Historically, this was the format, and we would now have the floor debate, where the role of the floor debate is to firstly introduce the debate into new areas. So if there's new topics you want to talk about, you're encouraged to do so, or to respond to arguments in a way they haven't already been responded to. So if someone said something you think is incorrect and you want to challenge them on that, please do so. So now for the next sort of, up to pretty much as long as we want, unless we're really sort of going on for like 40 minutes or something. We're going, anybody in the audience has the ability to give a speech for pretty much as long as they can, or want to, but like don't abuse that. And then after that, we'll have the summaries. So has anybody got any contributions they want to make to the debate? Yes, over there.
Just have a quick question. Are we allowed asking pointed questions to the speakers that have already spoken, or should we keep it to like a...
The speakers who had already spoken won't be able to respond to you. However, a member of their bench will still give a speech. So if you want to challenge the proposition on a line of their analysis, or challenge the opposition, it is then up for the summariser in that team to respond to your challenge or rebuttal. If that's clear. Any questions, anyone? Come on, don't be shy. Holly?
So the opposition's case, well, sorry, I'm going to in particular
are consenting to these rights, they have no way of judging up, like weighing up the situation. You know, oh, you know what? Actually, I think I'm doing something good. I don't like. I think you need to prove how that is therefore fair. How like we can impose these rights on animals, and how we as moral actors can make those decisions on behalf of animals.
Very good. Aaron.
On propositions, guys, I was thinking you guys main case of talking about the rights of animals and stuff like that, but I thought rights is something of human construction that human usually applies to humans. And now if you're trying to apply to animals in order to sort of like help us understand, isn't there necessarily a difference between sort of humans and animals in that sense? For example, we are talking about consent here, but animals probably can't consent not to be killed by their predators, whereas us, we have like human rights convention, and so just thinking maybe you guys could clarify on that line.
Okay. Anybody else? Is that it? Okay, again.
Hi. A lot of the, this is for the proposition, a lot of the argument was on the autonomy of animals and a kind of argument against humans not intervening on the animal's body without consent. I was just wondering whether that would lead you onto an argument where you were suggesting that we should not own animals, as owning would be, if we gave them autonomy like human beings, would be a form of slavery. And also, what happens when we try to medicate animals against their will, when they would not be able to consent to medication themselves?
Very good. Yeah.
Just a point I think was talked over a little bit. Like we heard on the proposition that banning animal testing would mean we create new ways of testing. Like I think Botox was given as example, and there are a few others. But opposition, they responded by saying it happens anyway, and it's sort of, I think there could have been a bit more said about how, for example, insulin was for years collected from pigs, but because it was imperfect, we developed another method. So even though, yeah, banning would require that we figure them out quicker, but I didn't hear like much of the weighing over whether animal testing is worth delaying that, or like stopping that gap is worth delaying the finding of new testing methods.
Yep.
One of the arguments used in testing on mice was that they lack, MRIs have shown they lack sexual cells. And I don't know how much conclusive evidence there is for that, but is there anybody who's voicing the opinion that we could have a blanket ban on testing on some animals that are perhaps more receptive?
No. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The government is talking about extending the rights to the animals, but if we go by that logic, will the Prime Minister be next putting forth a motion in order to ban meat from our plates and make entire nation vegetarian by law? And also, if we go further along that logic, then when we talk about right to safety, should we set up a protection force in order to protect rabbits in the wild to getting hunted from the predators? Where do we stop? Where do we draw the line?
Very good. Yeah. Oh, they're coming now. Yeah.
Sorry, I know you've had this point before, but the thing I find strange about this debate is that, well, the title of it, which is what the opponents were arguing against, which is to ban all forms of animal testing. And I just have an issue with that, which is that I feel we're dragging the focus of the debate away from what really we should be discussing, which is how is the current model of testing on animals, how justified that is. I think, as we've seen, most people are for a certain degree of testing on animals. However, there are so many other issues at play. We haven't really, I mean, for instance, looking at how reliable models are, how reliable the animal models are for having that used as a human model, we haven't really gone into depth with that. And I think there's a lack of sincerity where that's concerned.
Definitely, and if I can add something, I think that talking about the status quo and how that relates to this motion is something which, if I was in summary, I would try and do at some point. Because I do actually think it's really important. Yeah, at the back.
I was thinking, you talk, there's been lots of things thrown around about guinea pigs not being perfect because they are killed by people. Just like to point out, we don't use guinea pigs for that reason. But there was also things about, you went to the opposition, you talk lots of
good. If we go, as I said at the back before, go all the way to the back. Yeah.
The point of like projecting rights onto animals. I thought the whole basis of human rights is that humans could have the capacity to respect each other's rights, and if they violate each other's rights, there's some like mechanism of punishment. I know there's not always is, but the whole point of human rights today there should be. Now, the problem I have is if we project these rights to animals, if I'm in the wild, a wolf will still maul me down and eat me, and won't respect my rights. And a rabbit will still come into my fields while I was a farmer and eat my lettuce. So the point is, if animals don't have the ability to understand and conceptualize and respect rights, why should animals have rights at all?
Very good. If we go over here.
On for the proposition, you say, we're giving examples of other methods of testing, but I mean, even if we were able to construct a computational experiment, the economics of that would be, well, most probably be highly unviable. The cost of powering a supercomputer would be astronomical compared to the cost of keeping 1,000 mice alive or however long a mouse's lifespan is.
Very good. If we go over there now.
I think during the debate, at least, some of these points here that we made, there needs to be a clear distinction, doesn't seem to exist currently, between welfare and rights. So I believe it's the opposition mentioned the RSPCA as an example. The RSPCA is only concerned with the welfare of animals. It's not a organisation that is promoting animal rights. Having said that, welfare is, in my opinion, just as good a justification to end all forms of animal testing as is justification of rights. But of course, and the point was made, if we were to go to use rights as our justification, that would therefore follow that we'd all need to be vegetarians at the very least. If animals do have rights, the first and foremost is the right to life. And the other point is that we should kind of keep it clear also, because if it's about rights, then couching rights in economic terms is somewhat ridiculous.
Yeah, any questions? Yeah, Jamie?
I was just going to make the point that on the topic of incentives, there are some things to which it doesn't matter how strong your incentive is when you are faced with a task which is like physically essentially impossible or almost impossible. You cannot like incentivize, for example, spontaneous thinking of career schools. Like it doesn't matter how strong the incentives for something like that is. In the same way, you cannot necessarily like expect that by taking away like your ability to do animal research now, tools will spontaneously develop. Tools that have developed in the past and which we have like dropped animal testing for have come as a consequence of building on previous tools. If we take away all of our tools now, we do not necessarily have the ability to build new ones.
Yeah.
I would like to ask the opposition what their opinion is on the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, where prestigious scientists around the world have signed the declaration that declare that animals do have a consciousness similar to humans.
Yeah. Any more? Okay, I would like to thank everyone for their contributions. I thought that was really helpful. I felt there were lots of new areas regarding the different aspects of morality for people to talk about, and I think that really there are some hard-hitting rebuttals in there. If I can add one myself, I'd say that the opposition have tried to run like a base utilitarian case, as they've said that we have a greater ability to feel stuff, so on a utilitarian level, we should be prioritized. Yet at no point have they actually justified doing things like testing on people who are comatose or mentally ill, and I would hope they wouldn't, because most people in this room would find the idea of doing that morally abhorrent. So what I would like to know is, why do they draw that deontological line there where they stop, and why does that line not apply to animals? Right, so So why is it that like there's a line they won't go past for humans, regardless of the utilitarian consequences, like testing on, like even say harvesting someone's organs? Why is it they would not kill me and give my organs to 8 different people, all my age and with my ability to live like a fulfilled life? That would definitely like increase quality of life by 8, right? Assuming that I'm roughly similar to all the people who are gaining from my 8 different organs. So why is it that they don't think it would be okay to do that without my consent, but would do it to an animal? Like, what is that barrier that they need to cross? Because that is obviously more than just experience. And so now I'd like to come on to the summaries. Because the opposition have had the ability to respond to the proposition, had the ability to speak last so far in the debate, we will now have the opposition summary first. And so I'd like to call upon Nick to summarise the case for the opposition. Also, Nick, before you start your speech, because I turn the camera, I've got to like fiddle about with it again so it looks okay.
Get his best side.
Take your time.
Looking good, man.
Cheers.
Live to the nation, Nick Zavidis.
Ready?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In summarizing this debate, I'm going to look at 2 different questions. First, is there any moral significance between humans and animals? A question that Toby posed to us. And secondly, is animal testing necessary? Which is ultimately what this debate comes down to in terms of the practical impact of legalizing this motion. First, a few responses to some of the issues posed from the floor debate. So, we heard from 2 or 3 different people this idea of consent, that animals do not consent to having their rights taken away, and so we shouldn't do that. We tell you that that's just not the case in justifying the not taking away of their rights, in the same way that we have prisoners, in the same way that the state takes away the rights of certain people in order to achieve some net utility, some net benefit. Secondly, this idea that we should have a blanket ban on some animals is basically the status quo. Because of the criteria outlined by George, certain animals simply do not fall under the category under which the current regulations allow for animals to be tested. You cannot have a dog, for example, no thanks Elliot, be a test subject. Why not go straight from stem cells to humans? There's a couple reasons why. So firstly, it takes a lot of time to actually observe the long run effects of certain medications. And it's simply impractical to do that on humans because it would just take too long for the medicine, all the harm that could be preserved or avoided by applying this medicine to the market immediately or as soon as possible is then lost. Secondly, to estimate the initial dosage required for those human subjects to take is impossible going from stem cells in the beginning. You need to have a sort of organism to apply it on, because otherwise you just don't know if it's 1 milligram or 100 or 0.001 that's going to do the job. You can make an estimation beforehand, but to come to a more realistic number and apply it to human test subjects without killing them, for example, which we think is kind of a bad thing, you need to have these animal subjects. Finally, supercomputers are too expensive. Firstly, I just don't think that's true. It's pretty relatively cheap to just rent out processing power or appeal to charities for that. But even if it is expensive, we're happy to subsidize it to the point that it's not that expensive and infringes upon research. So, is there any moral significance between humans and animals? So Toby says that there is no fundamental difference between humans and animals, and so we should consider their interests equally. No thanks. We tell you that that's not true. And the thing is, we do take the preferences of animals in equal weighting to those of humans. We do not have an inherent bias against animal interests. But what we tell you is we accept that ethical judgments must be made from a universal point of view. We accept that our own needs, wants, and desires cannot simply, by virtue of being our own and not someone else's, take precedence over other rights. No thanks. What we do tell you, and what James does point out, is that the magnitude of human preferences is greater than the magnitude of animal preferences, for the reasons relating to things like us being able to perceive pain in a more intense way. And their response to that is they attack the secondary reason, no thanks Elliot, which is the fact that we conceive ourselves as an entity over time, like much more so than an animal. And they're like, oh, so because you think of all the implications of you dying, you shouldn't, like, your rights take over. No thanks, Toby. Or actually, in a minute. We tell you that A, that is the case, and secondly, the level of pain and the intensity of pain we feel just by virtue of having a brain that is more complex and like works in more and works differently than that of animals means that the pain that we will feel is greater. And so to like use that pain over the significantly lower levels of pain of the test subjects is not a good idea. Go.
So Nick, please explain to us why, when you have somebody who's very intelligent and can fully understand what's going on around him, and then somebody who's maybe mentally challenged and is not able to understand what's going around him, why is it that that does not justify giving more rights to a more intelligent person and not removing rights from a less intelligent person for the benefit of more intelligent humankind?
Toby, I don't think I should justify that, given that Elliot gave us some reasons why that is the case. We're not saying that by virtue of being more intelligent, you're entitled to those things. There's a difference between intelligence and ability to perceive pain. We say that suffering, we agree with you that it's suffering that is the metric on whether like we should do certain things to you or not. We say that the suffering of humans is more intense than that of animals, and for that reason, we take precedence in terms of our rights in the majority of cases with regards to pharmaceutical testing. Second question, is animal testing necessary? So the first thing we hear from PROP, or one of the things we hear from PROP, is that by banning animal testing, we're going to create new incentives, or create incentives for new technology, things that were previously unthought of, like things that we previously wouldn't have used. And he talks about Botox. Now, the thing with Botox is, firstly, it's not a medical necessity. So presumably the incentive behind developing better Botox is probably less than the incentive for doing things like curing cancer. Even if that's not the case, we tell you that the reason why we moved to better technology after banning animal testing for Botox isn't because of like magically someone came up with the idea, but because you had those projects being developed. You have things like artificial human skin. If in the future we do develop artificial whatever it takes to have animal testing be replaced, we're happy to do that. But we tell you that at this point, that's not the option. Second criticism of that. So existing technology would be improved if you were to ban animal testing because there would be a greater incentive to use that. But there is no way that they can prove to us, or they haven't proven to us, the new forms of technology, so the step between 0 and 1, could be achieved by banning that. The incentives behind developing new technology in that way already exist. There would be no difference. Secondly, animal testing is something harmful to like pharmacy in general, and he talks about penicillin. So the fact that guinea pigs would die from penicillin means nothing, okay? Because we're applying much more rigorous testing than test it on the first animal. If it dies, move on to the next drug. No, obviously not. You're going to use many more different test subjects. You're going to use computer simulations and all those other things that they want. But at the end of the day, there's no like additional harm caused by using animal testing. And if there is, just don't use it. We don't have to ban it. Ladies and gentlemen, because it's a necessity, because ultimately our rights take precedence over the rights of animals in these cases, we're very happy to oppose this motion. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Nick very much for his speech, and I would like to call upon Aparna to summarise the case for the government and the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you about three things today, right? Firstly, the suffering calculus that George brings up in his speech, and why that's actually like thinking about that in terms of rights and in terms of like how we prioritize rights, right? Secondly, I want to talk about alternatives, and thirdly, about like how useful it is anyway. I want to apologize for any coughing that may have occurred so far, but not as much as the opposition has to apologize for all the stuff they've said today. Anyway, so like firstly when we think about like suffering, like the suffering calculus, right? Opp tell us that the reason like human suffering is greater than animal suffering is all because of like self-conception, right? We say that like yes, self-conception is probably important, but what it is not important is in terms of like thinking about our rights in terms of like our ability to suffer pain, right? Because pain is actually quite absolute. So when we just think about like if I have the like ability to like know that I'm going to die, why that's so much greater than like just going ahead and killing an animal like straight off, right? Secondly, we want to talk about like consciousness. So James comes up here and tells us, yes, I'm quite happy to die if like 3 people could be like saved by my death, right? The thing is that animals aren't making that choice. James is happy to do it, but animals are not, right? Because like the animal is not able to conceive that like people would be saved. Actually, what you're doing to animals is paramount to going, I have 2 kidneys. Like lots of people could, like 2 people could survive on my 2 kidneys, like 2 other individuals could survive on my kidneys. I don't want to give you any kidneys, guys, but you're just going to come and like snatch it from me without my consent, right? That's actually like the choice we're giving these animals, which is like not the same choice, like it's not the way that Opp are trying to frame it, right? Like secondly, we want to talk about like there are ways in which animals feel suffering, right? Like Toby's already told you about like memory. Like Toby tells you that animals have instincts, right? When you go to give an animal a drug that's probably going to give it cancer, it will probably run away from you, right? But if you go to inject it, it's probably going to run away from you. Like once it realizes that you're giving it stuff that's causing it to have pain, it's probably going to run away from you. We see like animals are still able to conceptualize that things that cause them pain, like they don't want, right? We say that's an active opt-out of whatever you're trying to give them, right? Now James talks about like prioritization of rights, and like how like rights aren't absolute, right? We say that there's a difference between active harm and passive harm. So we say that putting prisoners in like jail after they've done something bad is probably a bad thing. Is probably a good thing, right? But going ahead and killing someone who is likely to become a criminal is probably a bad thing. So like we say that like in that way they can't justify like the kind of suffering they cause animals through this, right? Lots of things from the floor debate. We say that like humans have the ability to respect each other rights, and we have like a manifesto of rights for humans. We say that but life and pain are actually quite fundamental to the way animals conceive of themselves. Like the most basic, the only calculation actually for like an animal is I like pleasure, I like eating food, I like having sex, I don't like getting stabbed, right? These are the calculations that animals are making, and we say that like we should respect the calculations that they are making, like just because we don't like understand their specific type of pain and their specific actually how they're conceptualizing these things, it does not mean that we should just go ahead and do anything we want to them, right? Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about status quo and how we think about rights with regard to the status quo, right? We said that the status quo, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. An animal has a momentary instinct that something bad is going to happen. A human has 6 months to think about the fact they are going to no longer exist. We don't say that the latter means humans necessarily have greater rights than animals. It merely means that when we can only avert one of them, we should avert the harm that accrues to the human as opposed to the harm that accrues to the animal, meaning we should do animal testing so that we can do that.
Okay, so we say that you cannot reprioritize animal rights just because the duration is longer, right? We say that for that animal, that's all it knows, right? Its entire world is completely destroyed when you go stab it, right? Or stick an injection in it. A human being has other things to live for, right? A human being still has family, a human being still has other things. That's all the animal knows, you've basically taken away all of its happiness. Okay, secondly, to go on to alternatives, right? We say that we've actually got no response from them on the fact that a lot of drugs fall through the system because of animal testing. Elliot tells you this in his speech, we get no response. The reason we are not able to give you examples is because these examples don't exist, because we don't know they exist, right? So basically, if you think about, if we have 4 drugs, right? A, B, C, and D, and if B causes the least harm to animals, that's actually not a very good indication of what it's going to do to animals, right? So say A A kills all the animals we test upon, and like D kills none, and then we send D into like human testing, right? And like D is just horrible for human beings. It could be that like A is actually very good for human beings, right? Like so A, B, C have fallen through the system. D has like caused like nothing, but like a bunch of animals have died in the process anyway, and probably a bunch of humans cannot be saved, right? We say this is quite a bad thing.
A partner.
Yes.
Yeah, the problem is that that's only an argument to ban animal testing if you have something better that means that we can save those animals.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting on to that, right? We say like, yes, these things are speculative to an extent, right? But the thing is, what we showed you with the Botox example is that like pharmaceutical companies respond to incentives, right? Once animal testing gets banned, we just come up with alternatives, right? That like develop from like we have lots of alternatives already and like lots of stuff that we can work on, right? We also say that like we'll probably like just have to make like human testing different and like work with the system, right? The second thing like we want to talk about in terms of rights is like all of the arguments they've given you in terms of rights also apply to people who don't have the ability to like feel stuff, people who don't have the ability to consent, people who like any like patient who like cannot, like any person in a coma, any person who like has like a mental illness. We say that like all the arguments they've given you apply to this as well, and like it's unclear why, like where they draw this distinction, right? And we say like we're not okay with them drawing this distinction, and therefore like we're not happy with like their case, right? Thirdly, about like I'm just gonna sit down.
Okay, I'd like to thank Apollo very much for her speech. And can we have a round of applause for all of the speakers? Since debating something you sort of don't really do at home and then do at university, for most of them this has been their first debate in about 3 months, and I thought they were absolutely terrific. So really glad they were all happy to help out and did really well. What we're going to do now is we're going to have another vote. So again, your options are whether or not you support the proposition, the opposition, or whether or not you abstain. So can I have votes for the proposition, please?
Are you basing this based on how the speakers did, or on meetings?
Up to you, really, whatever you value more. But I mean, if you think you've been swayed more way or another by the speakers, please just die somewhere else. But like if they are, you know, if you've been swayed by a speech or thought it's particularly impressive, you might want to reward that with your vote. But it's up to you how you vote. So votes for the proposition. Cool. Votes for the opposition. Yep, and abstentions. The motion has been defeated, however there was a bigger swing to the proposition. So read that as you may, both sides did very well. Round of applause, yeah. So, yeah.
Sorry, are we finished? I'm just going to do a call out. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Jack from the Animal Ethics Society. I don't know if, well, basically, I felt that this, the talk today was very valuable, the debate today was very valuable. It's great that we discuss these issues as a student body. However, if you feel that perhaps today we almost sort of only skirted the issues, the top of the issues, skimmed only some of them, I think you feel there's probably some more depth to go into things. You know, the question of whether animals have a consciousness, for instance, the Cambridge study, or whether we should address some of the attitudes to factory farming or the testing in general of animals, whether that should be questioned. If you share any of the sentiments we have, we're very keen for people to come along you can find us on Facebook, it's Warwick Animal Ethics Society. So yeah, thanks.
I highly recommend that actually. I learn a lot just from being in their Facebook group. They post loads of really useful, like informative links and stuff, which I read and enjoy, and they also have lots of good events. The reason why this session's a bit shorter than the normal one is because, as I said at the start, our big Leamington adventure leaves the duck at 6:30. So if you're a fresher and you want to go home to eat, you have time to do that. Because you might not want to eat in Leamington, although I will be and some other people will be, so you could join us there. So the social starts at leaving the duck at 6:30. So if you want to go, please turn up to the duck by then. Please come along. Do you want to do an announcement on that?
No, we've just got a tweeting bar saying read the results out. The numbers for the results.
Okay.
Also, if you want to come to the duck now, many of us will be going there.
Yeah, lots of us are going to the duck now if you want to come chat about it, the debate or whatever else. Thank you for coming, by the way. Really, thank you for coming. I hope we... Yeah, no, it's okay.
I never think we were going to be...
Okay, that's sweet. That is the end of week 4. So next weekend, there's like a link on you can tell me now, but to be honest, I'll probably forget. Not because I don't care about you, but just because like 1,000,001 people might do that. What? That's great. That's exactly what it's designed for. Camera demonstration. Yeah, it's similar to today's format really, but instead of floor debate, there's something called an extension. So it's another speaker on each side, but their job is to extend into a different area of the debate and do rebuttal. So like the floor debate was, but obviously you can't have a floor debate in a competition, you can be biased, so thank you. No, it's like, I mean, we didn't think we could to have like a biased panel, not an unbiased panel.
I wasn't biased.
And pick like our speakers or whatever else. And I think the reason why we were happy with this motion is because we felt that any motion about the current thing just gets bogged down in quite bad practicalities. Because we thought it would be very interesting to watch. This was more presented to us.
I'm sorry about the...
Because then they're probably all...
I just had this suspicion of stuff. Is
Good
that common for you to film today?
Yeah.
Sorry?
We filmed them after today.
We'll be leaving the dog about 6:30.
I'll make it about 6 or so.
Yeah. Well, they're concerned. We'll all be there. Keep an eye on us.
No.
Of course it's not that, but it's just that. Sorry, what's your name? Ed. Ed, hi. Ed Clancy. No, Mancy. Sorry. Awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Nice.
It's good.
I enjoyed it. I actually thought that the prompt was pretty good.
Yeah.
I just don't like people.
Your what?
Alternatively, like hang around and...
Actually, it wasn't that overwhelming. About a third of people
The thing last year?
Yeah.
That was really valuable.
Yeah.
Although still, it's impossible to come to.
So I'm
there's so many things at play.